Now finally, we want to define a resolution. So when we move this particular risk work item into the closed state, there could be various reasons why we closed it. We want to define one now to indicate that that risk has been mitigated. So we'll create a mitigated resolution. We'll use the same icon as close. And we'll associate our close action with that mitigated resolution. I think our state transition matrix looks okay, so hopefully our workflow is complete. Let's go ahead and save that project area. So we now have our workflow defined, we have our risk work item type category defined. Let's go to workflow bindings so that we can associate this newly created workflow with the risk work item type category. We'll choose our type category and our workflow in order to bind those. Finally, we need to design what the form will look like when we create a new risk work item. As with workflows, the forms, or editor presentations as they're called in RTC, are created independently from the work item types themselves and then bound to the work item types. Since we don't want the risk forms to look drastically different than the form already designed for defects and tasks, we'll use the default editor presentation as a starting point for our risk editor presentation by duplicating it. So we'll start with our default editor presentation and choose duplicate. And we'll give our new presentation a name. So now we can begin customizing the form. But before we do that, notice that each of the tabs indicated in the editor presentation here are tagged with content shared. Just like a different editor presentation can be shared between different work items, the various tabs and sections within an editor presentation can also be shared between editor presentations themselves. If we were to modify any of the content in the overview tab here, we would be changing the content for all of the editor presentations that use this overview tab. So before we make changes, what we want to do is duplicate these sections so that we can make changes just for this risk editor presentation. So we'll duplicate the overview and we'll call it risk overview. And we'll remove the original overview that we're not using anymore. We want to do the same for the details section because we're going to be making changes in here. So we'll duplicate it, give it an ID of risk details, and again remove the original. So now we can begin making customizations to this editor presentation for risk work items. First thing we can do is remove a couple of the tabs that don't really apply to risk items. For example, approvals and the custom. We'll just remove those tabs so they don't show up at all. Now we can begin making changes in the details section of our overview tab. The first thing we want to do is remove a few of these attributes that don't really apply to risk work items. For example, the type attribute would allow the user to change the type of the work item being created inside the editor presentation itself. Since we're creating this editor presentation just for risk work items, we don't want that type to change, so we'll just remove the attribute from the form so that if he says he wants to create a risk, he'll create a risk and won't be able to change it. We'll also remove a couple of other attributes that we don't have need for in a risk work item. For instance, we'll remove the severity attribute, the planned for attribute, and the estimate attribute. And now so that we'll see our new risk level attribute, we'll add that to the presentation. We'll create a label called risk level. It will be an enumeration attribute. And we'll use the risk level attribute that we created previously. Now that gets added to the bottom of our details section. We want to move it up to the top so that it's easy to find when we go to create a new risk work item to make sure we did things right. And we'll save our project area. So now that we've completed our customizations, we can bind this new editor presentation to the risk work items. Again, we go to Editor Presentation Bindings, select the risk work item, and select our new risk editor presentation. And we'll save that. So now if we've done everything right so far, we should be able to go to our temperature conversion project and create a new risk work item. And hopefully the presentation form that we see will have the customizations that we made. So far so good. Here's our risk level with our attributes, with our enumerations that we selected, high risk, medium risk, or low risk. Also notice that the custom and approvals tabs are gone, as are the severity, planned for, and estimate fields. So it looks like we did everything right. And that will conclude our demonstration of RTC's capabilities for work item customization.